Marcus Hale had not smiled in 14 months. Not when the board handed him a standing ovation at the annual shareholders meeting. Not when Forbes printed his face on their cover with the headline, "The Man Who Built Tomorrow." Not even when his assistant placed a warm cup of coffee on his desk each morning and said, "Good morning, sir," with the kind of careful cheer people reserved for men they were afraid of. He sat at the head of a conference table he could no longer see, his fingers resting on the polished wood, his face turned slightly toward the window, not because he could see the Manhattan skyline beyond it, but because that was the direction of the accident. He had calculated it once, lying awake at 3 in the morning. 47 blocks northeast. That was where the car had gone off the road. That was where his daughter had taken her last breath. That was where Marcus had lost his sight and his reason for existing in the same terrible moment. His penthouse apartment sat on the 53rd floor of the Hale Tower, a building he had designed, funded, and named after a family that no longer existed the way it used to. 3 floors of curved glass and curated silence. A chef who came twice a day and left without speaking. A rotating team of personal assistants who learned quickly that Marcus Hale did not do small talk, did not tolerate pity, and did not want anyone asking how he was doing. He had everything. He had nothing. His neurologist had insisted on a private nurse not to manage his blindness, which Marcus had been navigating with furious independence, but because his blood pressure had become dangerously erratic, and he had collapsed twice in the past 3 weeks. Once in the boardroom. Once in his bathroom, alone, where he had lain on the cold tiles for 40 minutes before his phone's voice assistant reached his emergency contact. The agency sent 3 nurses before they sent Amara. The first 2 lasted a combined 9 days. One had made the mistake of speaking about him in third person while he was in the room. He might prefer the softer chair. Marcus had fired her before she finished the sentence. The second had tried to read him motivational quotes from a book she'd brought without being asked. He hadn't even fired her out loud. He simply called the agency and said, "Send someone else." Amara Osei arrived on a Tuesday morning with a small canvas bag over her shoulder and no speech prepared. She knocked twice. His assistant let her in. She walked to the center of the living room, looked around once at the expensive art, the darkened smart glass, the untouched bowl of fruit on the kitchen counter, and said nothing. She simply waited. Marcus heard her footsteps stop. He heard her breathing settle. Most people who entered his space made noise with their nervousness, shuffling feet, clearing throats, the small performances of people trying to prove they weren't uncomfortable. Amara made none of those sounds. "You're the nurse," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. "Amara Osei. I'll be here from 7 to 7 unless you need me longer." "I won't." "All right." That was it. No reassurance, no warm introduction. No, "I've heard so much about you," or "I'll try not to disturb you." She simply moved toward the kitchen, learned where everything was without asking him to explain, and checked his medication schedule from the file she'd been given. Marcus turned back toward the window. He told himself she was like the others, that she would say something wrong by Thursday, that he would have her replaced by the weekend. But Thursday came, and Amara had not said anything wrong. She had, in fact, said very little at all. She checked his blood pressure twice daily without announcing it dramatically. She brought his medications with water, set them down, and waited without hovering. When he missed a dose because he'd fallen asleep in his chair, she didn't wake him. She left a note in raised letters on his side table. She had learned he used a Braille overlay that read simply, "Evening dose, waiting on the kitchen counter." It was on Friday evening that Marcus first noticed something was different about her. He had been sitting in the living room for 3 hours. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't moved. He was doing what he often did in the evenings, existing in the particular silence of a man who has replayed the worst moment of his life so many times that the memory no longer arrives in images, but in feelings. The weight of the seat belt, the smell of rain on asphalt, the sound to God, the sound of his daughter's voice saying "Daddy" right before everything went black. He heard Amara stop walking. She had been moving quietly through the apartment, doing her final checks before the end of her shift. But she stopped, and she stayed stopped. "I'm fine," Marcus said before she could ask. She didn't ask. She didn't move either. The silence stretched between them, not the uncomfortable kind that demanded filling, but the kind that held something inside it. After a long moment, Marcus exhaled through his nose. His jaw was tight. His hands, resting on his knees, had curled without him noticing. "You're still here," he said. "My shift doesn't end for 11 more minutes," Amara said. "You can go." "I know." She didn't go. Marcus turned his face slightly in her direction. It was something he still did out of habit, turning toward the source of a voice as though he could still read a person's expression. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Standing," she said simply. Marcus hadn't responded. But the words had stayed with him. One morning, 12 days into her assignment, he knocked over his coffee cup. It was a small thing. His hand misjudged the edge of the table by half an inch, and the cup went over, and the coffee spread across the papers in front of him, and the edge of his sleeve. He heard it happen, and he sat very still, the way he always did when he made a mistake he couldn't undo, absorbing the frustration inward. Amara was at his side within 4 seconds. She didn't say, "Oh, no," or "let me get that," or any of the fussing language that made him feel like a liability. She simply placed a cloth in his hand, pressed it gently against the table, and began clearing the papers without comment. "I have it," Marcus said tightly. "I know," she said. She kept helping anyway. "I said I have it." "You do," she agreed. "I'm just here." He stopped arguing. His jaw was tight, but he stopped arguing. And something about that, the refusal to back away, the refusal to make it into an event, cracked something small in the wall he had spent 14 months building. "How long have you been a nurse?" he asked. The question surprised him as much as it surprised her. He hadn't meant to ask it. It had simply arrived, the way questions do when a person is looking for something to hold on to. Amara paused. 8 years, she said. "You're young for 8 years. I started young." He was quiet. Then, "Why nursing?" She took a moment before answering. Not a hesitant moment, a considered one. "My mother was sick for a long time," she said. "The nurses who cared for her were the only people who weren't afraid to be in the room with dying. I thought that was the bravest thing in the world." Marcus said nothing. The words landed somewhere in his chest and sat there. "And you?" Amara said. "Why technology?" He blinked. In 14 months no one had asked him a personal question that wasn't about his health or his company. What? Why did you build what you built? Was it always the plan? "No one asks me that. I'm asking—" He was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "My daughter used to ask me that." His voice was low, even, controlled in the specific way of a man who controls his voice so he does not have to control anything else. She was 9. She used to say, "Daddy, what does your company actually do?" And I would explain it, and she would say, "But why?" And I would explain again, and she would say, "But why does it matter?" And I never had a good enough answer. The room was very still. "Did she ever stop asking?" Amara said. "No," Marcus said. "She never stopped asking." He turned toward the window. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the name neither of them had said yet, of the accident neither of them had mentioned, of the grief that lived in this apartment like a third resident. "Her name was Zoe," he said finally. He had not said her name out loud to another person in months. The sound of it in his own voice nearly stopped him. She was 9 years old. She liked terrible jokes, and she collected rocks from every city I took her to, and she was afraid of dogs, even though she pretended she wasn't. Amara set down what she was holding. "She sounds wonderful," she said softly. She was. His voice broke on the second word, just slightly, just enough. She was the only person in my life who didn't want anything from me, who just wanted me. He stopped. Amara did not rush to fill the silence. She did not say she's in a better place, or she would want you to be happy, the rehearsed consolations that people offered like coins into a machine, expecting change. She sat down across from him, and she was quiet, and she let him be broken without trying to repair it immediately. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comment section and tell us, do you think Marcus will ever allow himself to heal? We want to hear your thoughts. After a long moment, Marcus said, "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Staying, listening. You're not paid to sit here while I—" He stopped, pressed his hand flat against the table. Amara's answer was quiet and unhurried. "Some pain deserves to be seen," she said. "Not fixed, not rushed, just seen." Marcus turned his face toward her. For the first time since she had arrived, he looked like a man who had just heard something true. "Grief doesn't mean you stopped loving her," Amara said. "It means the love has nowhere to go. That's all." Something shifted in the room. In him. He did not cry, not then. But his shoulders, which had been held rigid for 14 months, dropped by half an inch. And Amara saw it. And she said nothing about it. She simply stayed. The nights were still the hardest. Marcus knew the shape of 3 a.m., the way a sailor knows a particular stretch of water, every current, every hidden reef. He would wake from dreams that weren't quite dreams, more like sense memories, the smell of rain, the weight of glass, the terrible specific silence after impact. He would lie still in the dark, his dark, the permanent dark, and wait for his heartbeat to slow. He had never told anyone about the 3 a.m. hours. He told Amara on a Thursday. It happened because she had stayed late. His blood pressure had spiked in the late afternoon, and she had waited for it to stabilize before leaving, which pushed her past 9, and by the time it settled, something in the atmosphere of the apartment had changed. The formal edges of the day had softened. The guard he kept up during daylight hours felt heavier to maintain. "Do you sleep?" he asked. She looked up from her notes. "Reasonably well. You?" "No, I know," she said. "Your cortisol levels are consistent with chronic sleep disruption." "That's a medical way of saying I wake up every night and can't go back." "Yes." He leaned back in his chair. "I dream about the accident," he said. "Every night. The same 10 seconds, over and over." His voice was flat, not because he wasn't feeling it, but because he had learned to carry feeling without wearing it on the surface. "I was driving. Did they tell you that? In the file?" "Yes." "Then you know it was my fault." "The report said black ice and a mechanical failure in the braking system." "I was the one driving," he said, as if she hadn't spoken. "I was the one who decided we were taking that road. Zoe had fallen asleep in the back seat. She'd had a long day, and she was—" He stopped, swallowed. "She was wearing her seatbelt. She did everything right, and it didn't matter." Amara set her pen down. "I couldn't save her," Marcus said. "I couldn't even find her in the dark. After the car stopped and everything was wrong, I couldn't see anything. I called her name for 4 minutes before the paramedics arrived. 4 minutes in the dark, calling my daughter's name and getting no answer." His voice did not shake. It simply went very, very quiet. "I haven't stopped calling for her since—" Amara's eyes filled, but she didn't look away from him. "Marcus," she said the first time she had used his name without a prefix, and neither of them acknowledged it. "What happened to Zoe was not your punishment. It was not the universe correcting something. It was a terrible, random, devastating thing. And you have been punishing yourself for 14 months for something that was never yours to carry. She was mine to protect. Yes, and you loved her completely. And the accident took her anyway. Both of those things are true." He was silent. "You're allowed to have survived it," Amara said. "You're allowed to still be here." The words hit him the way certain truths hit, not like a revelation, but like the lifting of something heavy that had been so long in place that the relief of it was almost painful. His chest tightened. His hands, those careful, controlled hands, trembled. And then Marcus Hale, who had not wept in front of another person since the day of the funeral, covered his face with both hands and broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. It was the sound of a man who had been holding the sea inside his ribcage and finally let the tide go. Amara did not speak. She did not tell him it was okay, or that he needed to breathe, or that she understood. She moved her chair closer to his, and she placed her hand on his forearm, not grabbing, just resting, and she stayed there while the grief moved through him like something long overdue. After a long time he lowered his hands. His face was wet, and his voice was hoarse, and he said, "I don't know who I am without her." "You're her father," Amara said. "That doesn't end," he exhaled slowly. "I haven't said her name this many times in a year." "You should say it more. It hurts." "I know," she said. "Say it anyway." He was quiet for a moment. Then low and careful and real, "Zoe." Amara kept her hand on his arm. "She would have been 10 last month," he said. "What would you have done? For her birthday?" The corner of his mouth moved the smallest, most fractured thing. "She wanted to go to Lagos. She'd seen a documentary about the markets, and she wouldn't stop talking about it. She'd made a list of things she wanted to eat." A breath. She was very serious about the list. Amara smiled. "That sounds exactly right. She was very serious about most things." The fractured corner of his mouth moved again. It wasn't a smile, not quite, but it was the outline of one, the memory of one, the possibility of one. "She got that from her mother. And the terrible jokes? Those were entirely from me. For one moment, just one, something lived in the space between them that wasn't grief. Something lighter. Something that had survived 14 months of dark." 3 days later, Amara arrived at 6:58 to find Marcus standing at the window. He was holding his coffee cup. He had made it himself. When she walked in, he turned toward the sound of her footsteps. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning. There's extra coffee," he said. "If you want—" She looked at him for a moment, at the set of his shoulders, still careful, still carrying everything but different, opened somewhere, breathing. "Thank you," she said. He turned back to the window, the one facing northeast. He stood there for a long moment, coffee warm in his hands, and then he tilted his face upward toward the light he couldn't see but could feel, the way light falls differently than shadow, even when the eyes are gone. And slowly, quietly, in the privacy of his own ruined and healing heart, Marcus Hale smiled. Not because the pain was gone, because he had finally let someone stand in it with him. Healing didn't erase what he had lost. It gave him the strength to carry it differently. And sometimes, on the mornings when the grief was quieter, when the 3 a.m. hours came and went without the worst of it, he would sit in his chair and picture Zoe's rock collection lined up on the windowsill of his memory, one stone from every city she'd ever been, and he would say her name out loud into the room, because grief doesn't mean you stopped loving someone. It means the love has nowhere to go. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is find someone willing to help you carry it. Thank you for joining the True Spark Stories family. Your love fuels our mission together. We're igniting hope, one story at a time. If this one moved you, please like this video, drop a comment below, and subscribe so you never miss a story. We'll see you in the next one.